recording. My name is Kevin Campbell-Wright from NIACE, and I'm just introducing to you Fabio, who's going to tell you a little bit about the webinar today. I have made reference in the introduction I've just done that we're having some technical issues. So hopefully those of you watching the recording, they'll all be cut out. But if there are any difficulties, you'll understand why. So Fabio, over to you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I hope that our presenter will be jumping in with the working mic in the next minutes. So in the meantime, I will be briefly introduce the webinar. Basically, this is the third webinar that we are organizing in the frame of the OER App project. OER App stands for OER Uptake in Adult Education. So basically, the project tackles the issue of open education and OER, but more than OER in this, as you will hear during this webinar, in the sector of adult learning, adult education, that, as you know, is I would say, quite a difficult sector for openness for a number of reasons that we've been discussing, that we are exploring during the project. Today, we are going to have with us one of the most relevant, I would say, experts in Europe and worldwide in the field of Open Pedagogies, Professor Gronia Conol. I will introduce her in a moment. The agenda, following this brief introduction, we're going to hear from Gronia about open pedagogy, about how does open learning look like in practice. In fact, the idea of this webinar is to provide you with some examples and some hints of what comes after OER, of what comes when you have implemented OER, and what you can do in terms of open practices and open pedagogy, and especially how you can include OER in your teaching and learning by keeping an open attitude in terms of practices again and approaches. Then we're going to have time for both question and answers, both live and especially through the chat below the presentation. Please use that so that your questions can be recorded. And then a brief mention to the next. These are the partners of the project. You can see it seems that Gronia is with us with the microphone, luckily.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, hello.
Can you hear me?
Very good to have you with us. Finally, we made it. I'm just finishing. Just finishing, Gronia, the quick presentation, and then I'll hand over to you. Just wanted to say that this webinar is part of the training that OER App is developing following a needs analysis and an online course. So this webinar will be recorded and will remain available for the learners of our course. And finally, just a snapshot of our course. Basically, we have 5 modules. We started from the very basics of OER, thinking of users and learners who are really not familiar with that. And we are now, this webinar is a part of module 5, meaning it is a module focusing on open educational practices and open educational resources in the classroom. So applying openness to your daily classroom and your daily teaching work with adult learners. So this is a bit the context. Now, today's expert is Professor Dr. Gronia Conol from University of Bath, Spa. She's rather new in the university, but not new in the sector. She's, as I was saying before, one of the most renowned experts globally in the field of open design, open practices, and OER. She has been doing a lot of work on MOOCs, on recognition of prior learning, and she's, I would say, exactly what we need for the work in OER App, because she tackles both, she tackles practical approaches. She presents practical ideas and practical approaches based and grounded on theories and on ideas, some broader ideas that typically are what is needed in sectors like open learning. I would like just to mention the book on the bottom, the Designing for Learning in an Open World. If you haven't read it, just have a look at it, because it's really enlightening and interesting. And also to Gronia's blog, E for Innovation, which can represent also a follow-up to what she will tell to us today. That's it. The word is yours. Can you?
Thanks very much. I'm so glad we were able to work that out. A bit stressful, but there we go. Good morning, everybody. be
Can I
here.
just
I
ask
hope
you,
we're going to
sorry,
have.
just before you start, can I just ask you if you click start sharing on your camera, we'll be able to see you as well, because at the moment we can hear you but can't see you.
Sorry.
Lovely, brilliant. Over to you.
There you go. Yes. Hi. Great. I'm glad we were able to get that sorted eventually. I don't know what the problem was. Okay, so I wanted to talk about the notion of openness, and in particular reflect on my own experience as an open practitioner. And as Fabio said, I've got a blog, E for Innovation, which I've had since 2006 or 2007. And certainly for me, social media have absolutely transformed the way I work as a practitioner. The book Fabio mentioned, I told Springer that I wanted to live blog as I went, and I did, and I got lots of really useful and insightful comments, which I'm sure made the book much better. By the way, it's way too expensive, so don't feel you have to buy it. If you want a copy of the near final version, just email me and I can give you access to the version on Dropbox. Okay, so I'm going to talk today a little bit about my own career history and some of the key turning points for me and some reflections on that. And then I'm going to talk about my research interests, which, as Fabio says, is around the internet generally and the use of digital technologies, and in particular the notion of open practices, OERs and MOOCs, etc. I recently was part of a team that did a report for IPTS in Seville on accreditation or recognition of non-formal and informal learning, and that should be available quite soon. I'm going to talk about learning design and my work in that area and social media. So that's the kind of outline, and if Fabio, if you could keep an eye on the chat box and pick up any questions, and hopefully we'll have time at the end to respond to those. So my name is Irish, a very strange name. It's not Grain or Granny, it's Grania. I was actually born in Cork, but my parents moved to England when I was 5. That's a picture of me on the left-hand side with knobbly knees and my 2 cousins, David and Sharon, at our aunt's wedding. And you can imagine I really took the mickey out of him for wearing that kilt. I've got one sister who's based in Brighton, Moya, and I had a dog when I was little called James Ulysses Joyce. And I went to school in Surrey, in South London, 2 Catholic schools, Holy Mary in Kingston, and then St Philomena's in Coshington. So that's the kind of background of where I'm from. I went to school between 74 and 82, long time ago. Very much a late developer. But I did get 10 A-levels, 10 O-levels and 4 A-levels. I really enjoyed doing art, and unfortunately I don't do it anymore. It's something I'd like to pick up again at some point. And then I went to university in Sheffield and did chemistry, and that's a picture of me and my graduation with my mum. I was very much a product, unfortunately, of the Thatcher years. And so when I left school, I felt I had to get a real job. And for a year, I worked for Allied Bakeries, of all things, and did a fast-track graduate training program and was an area retail manager. I had 150 staff across 10 outlets in London, including St. Paul's, a big shop in St. Paul's. I absolutely hated it. It really wasn't for me. And then I was lucky enough to get approached by a friend of my parents to go and do a PhD, which is what I did. I loved doing a PhD. My PhD was in X-ray crystallography, which is a bit like photography for molecules. And I was lucky enough at that time also to be able to do part-time demonstrating and lecturing whilst I was doing my PhD. The top 2 pictures are of me and a fellow student, Smruti, in Australia. We were lucky enough to get the chance to get funded to go to Australia and were there for 6 weeks. Absolutely fantastic. And that bottom picture is me lecturing with a good old-fashioned real blackboard and chemistry equipment in front of me. And I started lecturing in 1990 on a newly established Science Foundation course. And then I was lucky enough to get straight away a lectureship in inorganic chemistry. So during this time, changing roles, I had my daughters. That's my elder daughter, who's now 21, Eleanor, as a little tiny baby, and that's her with her favourite monkey at the time when she was about 2. I think that was taken at the Eden Project. I changed roles in 96 and got promoted to a post as director of a learning and teaching innovation unit. That was a newly established unit, which then became the Centre for Teaching and Learning Technology. And then I moved to Bristol in September 99. And that was really my break from chemistry. It was very weird because as a chemist, you had an identity. You could say to people, I'm a lecturer in chemistry, and people understood what that was. But when I moved into this kind of learning and teaching role, it was more nebulous. It wasn't very clear what it was. And I directed the Institute for Learning and Research Technology. And whilst I was there, we grew from about 30 people to 80 people, really quite a massive expansion. And we got lots of really interesting projects funded by JISC in particular. And then I moved to Southampton in 2002 and took up a chair in educational innovation. I was really delighted to get that post. And then I went to the OU in 2006. Great place to work if you work in the area of e-learning. And then to Leicester in 2011. And as Fabio said, I've recently started at Bar University. By the way, it's one of the most beautiful campuses in the UK, I think. So if you ever are down in this part of the world, do come and see me. And I'm a chair in education, but I've also got a cross-institutional e-learning remit. The bottom right-hand picture is a picture related to the fact that I got awarded a Higher Education Academy, what are they called? National Teaching Fellowship, which I was really delighted to get in 2010. So what were the key turning points for me? I think the first was an identity crisis, having a name like Grania, very unusual. When I went to university, I thought I'd change it to my second name, Catherine, but never managed to do it. And I still have an Irish passport, but of course I've got a very English accent, and I've lived in England all my time. Key choices in terms of academic subjects. I started doing sociology because my science teacher said I wasn't good enough to do chemistry, but switched to chemistry O-level, and of course I went on to do a PhD in that area. And I also switched from geography to maths. And really in my school, which was an all-girl Catholic school, there wasn't really much in terms of career advice or help in terms of choice for university. So you had to really do it on your own. So turning points, as I mentioned before, I hated being a retail manager and was delighted to get the opportunity to switch to do a PhD. Getting a lectureship early on, very unusual. Normally you have to go and do 1 or 2 postdocs before you get that, and getting promoted to being a principal lectureship and shifting into the area of looking at learning and teaching innovation. And then, of course, the birth of my 2 daughters, Eleanor and Tabby, who are now, of course, 17 and 21 respectively. Taking the Bristol post was a key opportunity for me. Tabby was only 6 months old. I was very lucky that the girl's dad was very supportive. And I was only able to do my career really because I had a string of nannies and au pairs. Well, only one nanny actually, who was awful, Claire. And that picture of the girl with the red top is Chloe, one of our favourite nannies, who's based in France. And then getting the chairs in the OU, Southampton, Leicester, and of course now at Bath Spa. And being able to secure funding through particularly JISC, though unfortunately that's not available very much, and more recently EU-funded projects. And I've got a number of projects at the moment looking at OERs and MOOCs, and becoming increasingly involved with various national and international activities and bodies. So what's the focus of my research? I'm interested in looking at ways in which we can enhance the learner experience, effective and innovative use of technologies, new ways in which we can help teachers rethink their design practice, and generally open practices in learning, teaching and research. And I'm very much involved in social media. Anyone who's connected with me on Facebook will know that it's filled with pictures of cats and Sunday roasts. So I use Facebook very much as a mixture of both professional and personal, and find it a very valuable network to get links. And Twitter I use primarily for professional purposes, disseminating interesting findings, getting advice, and I can see people have been tweeting about the seminar over the last few days. And of course my blog, which I find incredibly valuable as a reflective tool to write about ideas I'm developing or to reflect on something I've been doing. A while back I did a taxonomy for MOOCs, and I put a version of that up on the blog and then worked it up and eventually published it as a paper. So what do I think are the key moments in terms of e-learning, the key technologies over the last 30 years or so? I'd go back to when I started in this area in the late 80s with multimedia resources, with tools like Authorware Professional and Toolbook to create interactive multimedia resources. And then, of course, we had the emergence of the web in '93, and I created one of the first chemistry websites back in that time. Learning objects, which were really a precursor to open educational resources, the notion that instead of us all creating an Economics 101 course, we create one and share and adapt and repurpose that. Learning management systems important because they made institutions realise that technologies were not a peripheral innovation but were a core part of what we were providing our students. And of course they enabled us as academics to experiment with creating online resources and interacting with our students online. First generation of mobile devices, rather laughable when you compare them to what we have now. I have an iPad Air, which I absolutely adore and take everywhere with me. And of course I've got the iPhone here, iPhone 5 unfortunately, which is always plugged in because the battery life is dreadful. Learning design emerged around about '99 and very much predominantly from people in Europe and Australia. And a group of us have recently written a document on this to articulate what we mean by learning design and how it's different from instructional design, which is more North American. Gaming technologies around about 2000, becoming increasingly important now, often listed in reports such as the Horizon report in terms of emergent technologies. Open educational resources, fostered by organisations like UNESCO and the Hewlett Foundation, the idea that education is a fundamental human right and should be freely available. Social and participatory media, and it really has transformed for many of us our practices. Virtual worlds, very big in 2005. We hardly hear anything about them now. E-books and smart devices. Massive open online courses. The first was developed by George Siemens et al. In 2008, and of course then we saw big players like edX and Udacity and Coursera come into the market. And most recently, of course, the notion of learning analytics, the fact that underneath our learning management systems, we have lots of information that we can harness, that we can mine to better understand how our students are learning. So despite this, in terms of the amazing variety of technologies and the ways in which they can enable students to interact, to communicate, to collaborate, there are lots of barriers to adoption. The first is that both teachers and students lack the necessary digital literacy skills to effectively harness technologies. There's no reward for teaching often, particularly in research-intensive institutions. Do I spend 3 hours on a teaching innovation or 3 hours writing a paper that's going to secure me tenure? We're starting to see competition from other providers. There's an excellent series of videos by Pearson on Education 2020, which give a vision of where we might go in terms of the use of technologies for learning. It's very difficult to scale innovation, and there are issues around democratization and inequality and social inclusion. So why do I think e-learning is important? I think there are two main reasons. The first is its potential for learning in terms of supporting rich interaction with multimedia and communication and collaboration, the ways in which it can help develop digital literacy skills, the fact that it can promote different pedagogical approaches, reflection, communication, collaboration, dialogic learning, the ways in which it can foster creativity and innovation, and the ways in which it can connect students beyond the formal course. And more generally, for life, in terms of preparing students for an uncertain future, for a world in which they'll be doing jobs that don't even exist yet. Increasingly, employers are expecting students to be digitally literate. And of course, nowadays, really, we aren't part of society if we're not connected technologically. Most things occur online immediately. We had that awful situation in Paris 11, 12 days ago, and people were immediately tweeting about it as it happens. So in terms of the future, I think there are a couple of useful reports I'd point you to. I'm sure most of you know about this, the New Media Consortium Horizon reports, which come out yearly, which give an indication of the technologies which are going to have an impact in 1, 3 and 5 years' time. And there's an excellent annual report from the Open University called Innovating Pedagogy. And these are the 10 things they list for 2014. The 2015 report, as far as I know, isn't out yet. They talk about focusing on the social dimensions of massive open online courses, going back to the original notion devised by George Siemens et al. The relationship between learning design and learning analytics, the analytics telling us what's happening with our students and then improving the design. The flipped classroom, getting students to do things in advance and making the face-to-face sessions more student-centred and active. Increasingly a focus on bring your own devices and making sure the learning spaces are appropriately set up to do that. And learning to learn, focusing back on metacognition. They also talk about dynamic assessment as important, events-based learning, learning through storytelling, the notion of threshold concepts and how technologies can help us get across difficult, hard topics, bricolage, and in terms of learning through making and play. So what are some of the positives of technologies? I think the fact that we can go across devices. So I have a Spanish dictionary, which is on my iPhone, it's on my iPad, it's on my Mac. I can access it anywhere. The fact that increasingly everything is more open and free. The fact that we can be increasingly much more mobile. New technologies enable us to be much more dynamic and interactive. We can personalize. We can feel globally connected, and it's much more interactive. And on the whole, technologies are much more robust. And essentially, technologies are ubiquitous. We expect to be able to be online all of the time, wherever we are. So negatives, battery life. Anyone who's got an iPhone 5 will be very aware of that. There are issues around insecurity and privacy. The last couple of days, people have been chastising me on Facebook because I clicked on a link that did a word cloud of my most used words, and it turns out that what that app is doing is accessing all your information and using it, and we don't know where that's going to in terms of who it's being sold on to. There can be issues around costs. There are training needs, particularly academically, to make students and teachers make academic decisions about how to use technologies. They can be very time-consuming and addictive, and they can be often quite trivial. And they're transitory. Technologies are constantly changing, and we have to be aware of that, and they can be intrusive. So I wanted to talk about 3 phases of my research interests: the internet and open practices, learning design, and then social and participatory media. So in terms of openness, digital technologies enable us to be far more open. This is my 6th institution now, but I don't really feel so much of an allegiance to any one institution. I feel much more globally connected with the network of peers that I'm connected with on Twitter, on Facebook, etc. And my connections are very much like an onion ring. So there are those who I have very close contact with, who I know will always retweet something or will always respond to me on Facebook. And there are those that I have less interaction with. And it's amazing the number of people I've now met face-to-face who I first met online and feel that I already know them. And increasingly we're seeing lots of free resources and expertise, lots of webinars like this one, lots of people reflecting their ideas and thoughts on blogs and sharing and discussing, open repositories and journals. And some academics, of course, are making a particular stance against closed journals. So take somebody like Martin Weller at the OU. He refuses to publish in closed journals or even review for them. And so it's interesting about this kind of tension between open and closed systems and social media, of course. So what's the good and the bad of these technology? I think the fact that we're much more transparent. If I write a blog post and tweet it, it goes out to 8,000 people that I'm connected with, whereas if I post in a closed journal, I'm lucky maybe if 5 people read it. So we have far, far greater reach through social media. Arguably, they enable far more equity and social inclusion, and we're seeing a challenging of existing business models through open practice. In a world where increasingly resources and indeed courses are free, what does it mean for a traditional brick and mortar institution? What does it mean in terms of charging students, and what do they get by coming and having that face-to-face experience? I think we're seeing a disaggregation of education. So although everything's free, people will choose to pay for formal resources. People may choose to have a guided learning pathway or some form of support, and of course they may choose to pay for accreditation. However, there are issues in terms of laying yourself bare. Being completely open isn't always good, and I've had some strange experiences, particularly on Facebook in that respect. Being open means we're open to surveillance, and there are issues of that. We can have misuse of data or misinterpretation, and there can be issues in terms of quality and accreditation. And there are issues in terms of who owns what. So what's my network? This is my network. I do use face-to-face paper things as well. My blog is a constant tool that I use to work up ideas. Twitter I find inspirational in terms of getting information professionally. I'm in LinkedIn, but I don't use it extensively. I have Dropbox, which I use a lot, and SlideShare, etc. And of course, Facebook, which, as I say, I use for both professional and personal reasons. And I also use tools like EndNote for keeping tabs on my resources. Blogs, as I said, I've got E4 Innovation, my professional blog. I've also got a personal blog, which is about films, travel, cookery, much more interesting. That's gknoll.wordpress.com. And I think, as I said, blogs are useful in terms of having of-the-moment reflections. For example, the top picture there is for a project meeting that we had for a project called MOOCs for All, which has developed and delivered a MOOC about creating low-cost and efficient MOOCs. I think it's useful as a digital archive, so if I go to a conference or I read something interesting, I try and blog about it to keep a record of it. And it's incredibly powerful in terms of getting feedback and interaction from peers. So as I said with my book, I would blog chapters as I went, and people would come back and say, I really like this, I'm not sure where you're going with that, or have you seen this resource? So it's incredibly valuable as getting feedback and interaction. And it's also very motivating. It's great when you go into your blog and you've got some comments and people say, oh, I really like this, or what have you. So it can be a record of events, reviews and resources. And it gets, as I said, to a much wider audience than perhaps publishing in closed journals. I do, of course, play the game. I do still publish in closed journals, and I do still publish books. I'm currently doing one at the moment for Routledge on learning design, which is very late. It's going to be like 101 different kind of designs for fostering reflection, communication, collaboration, etc. I was thinking of calling it 50 Shades of Learning Design to increase sales, but decided that was professional suicide. So it would probably call something boring like learning design, a practical approach. And linking the blog into Facebook and Twitter. So if I do a blog post, I will tweet it, I will Facebook it, and people will get to find out about it that way. And I think blogs complement traditional publications. As I said before, often I will work up a blog. It's not too difficult to write 500 words, and then eventually later on work it up into a formal traditional publication or a book. So what are the ways in which I use Facebook? So apart from the pictures of my cats and my Sunday roasts, I do often tweet and Facebook about interesting things. This is a screenshot of a question to Facebook about how we can use Web 2 tools to combat social inclusion. And you can see a number of people have come back very quickly with comments on that. And similarly, you can get the same kind of ideas from Twitter. So Christina is somebody that I interact with a lot. She's based at Strathclyde University in Scotland. And using them together, using things like the hash Facebook tag in Twitter to make sure it goes to both Twitter and to Facebook. So I wanted to move on now to look at learning design. And despite the fact that we have an amazing array of technologies which can enable new forms of collaboration, communication and interaction, and we've got lots of free resources, the reality is they're not being used extensively by teachers. There's lots of evidence of bad pedagogies, and if you ask teachers, and we have, they say they don't have the time or the skills. And these comments echo a report which came out last year from the Association of Learning Technologies, which listed, did a survey and listed the kind of issues and barriers to the uptake of technologies. And some of the issues were lack of resources to provide release and support, relying too much on individuals who are championing innovation, lack of good direction at a strategic level, and lack of credit and recognition for innovative use of technology. So these are real problems and issues. So this has led me in the last 15 years or so to focus on learning design and ways in which we can help teachers make more effective design decisions that are pedagogically based and make effective and appropriate use of technologies. So what is learning design? I think there are three aspects. First, they provide teachers with guidance to make more informed design decisions. Secondly, it's about visualizing design. This is a lovely metaphor from James DL in Australia. He talks about the fact that musical notation nowadays is relatively new. And before it was developed, if you wanted to pass on a tune, you had to do it orally, and of course there was a loss of fidelity. But now with musical notation, it not only tells you exactly which notes in which order and how fast, etc., but you can absolutely perfectly replicate something developed by somebody 400 years ago, not only in terms of the tune, but also even in terms of the emotion. And that's what we're trying to do with learning design in terms of visualization, to get to a kind of visualization of the design practice. And thirdly, it's about sharing. One of the best ways in which we learn as teachers and get new ideas is a coffee room conversation where somebody says, I did this with a wiki with my students last week, and that's enough to give me ideas for what I might want to do. So this is my definition of what I think learning design is. It's a design-based approach to creation and supporting of learning activities. And it shifts from a belief-based implicit approach to design to one that's much more design-based and explicit. And I think it encourages reflection and scholarly practice and promotes sharing and discussion. A group of us were part of a MOOC developed by the Open University, and I'm not sure if it's still there, but it was at that link at the bottom, olds.ac.uk. And it was some of the key people in the area, people at the OU like Ishai Moore and people like Diana Laurelard, etc. So in recent years, as part of my work that I did at the Open University and then at Leicester and now at Bath Spa, we developed a framework called the 7 C's of Learning Design, and all these resources and activities are available freely at that bottom link. So the first C is to do with conceptualization. It's about creating a vision for the course. Who is the course for? What's the nature of the students, etc. And then there are a number of C's in terms of working up the learning activities. The Create C is looking at the ways in which we can create resources or the ways in which we can repurpose open educational resources. Then there are C's to do with fostering communication and collaboration. And the Considered C is the ways in which we encourage students to reflect and demonstration of their achievement of the learning outcomes or the assessment aspects. The Combined C enables us to step back from the design process and look at it from different ways, including a kind of activity profile of how much time the students are spending on different activities. And finally, it's about implementing the design in a real-world context and evaluating how effective it is, or the Consolidate C. So for each of these C's, we've developed a range of learning activities. So just to give you a flavour, under the Conceptualise C, we have the Course Features activity. People work in teams and they have a pack of cards, and they use those cards to decide what kind of pedagogical approaches they want to foster, what are the core principles of the course, what forms of guidance and support are there, what's the nature of the content and activities the students engage with, what forms of reflection and demonstration of understanding are there, and how are communication and collaboration fostered. This is the course view activity, which goes through the last 4 activities and details, and you can see in this particular course it's very much about peer support and activity learning. It's innovative for the participants. The evidence of demonstration of learning is through an e-portfolio, and there's a focus on collaborative activities and social practices. So learning design, as I said, is about helping teachers make effective design decisions that are pedagogically based and make appropriate use of digital technologies. And under James DL's leadership in Australia, a group of us in recent years have met a number of times in exotic locations, including Singapore and Larnaca, to articulate what we mean by learning design. And it's available at that link, larnacadeclaration.org. And we articulate how it's distinct from but complementary to instructional design. And it centres around those 3 features of guidance, sharing and visualisation that I mentioned earlier on. So what about looking at accreditation of non-formal learning? In a project called VM Pass, we were looking at this, and in particular the ways in which we could support learners to get formal recognition of their knowledge and skills. And it was a challenging project. We came up with a learning passport for accreditation, which had 3 components: information from the provider, the open educational resource provider, information from the learner, and information from the assessing or certifying institution. So moving on to MOOCs, which are like the step on, if you like, from open educational resources. I think they're good in that they're challenging formal education, and they're making institutions say, well, what is it that is distinct about being a student from bar spa? What's the added value of actually coming to a physical institution as opposed to learning online? And we're starting to see new business models emerging as a result of MOOCs, and new ways in which we can accredit informal and non-formal learning. There's an excellent series of blogs by the European Foundation for Quality in E-Learning, which has some of the key people in the area, Martin Weller, Stephen Downs, Dave Cormier, and it's got a very nice blog from a student perspective as well. And I did a blog about the MOOC taxonomy that I developed. So if you want to find more about MOOCs, I would recommend having a look at that link. So as I said, I developed a taxonomy, and I developed that because I felt that the original distinction of CMOOCs or connectivist MOOCs and XMOOCs was too limiting. CMOOCs tend to be weakly centered. They're much more about individual personalization of learning, and they really harness the power of social and participatory media. Typically, they have ways of filtering like a hashtag, and they use a range of social media. And each learner will use a different set of tools to meet their needs. XMOOCs from things like Coursera, edX, Udacity, etc. Tend to be much more linear in nature. They're mainly text, video, maybe with some formative feedback through e-assessment, and they tend to be more individually focused. But if we look at the range of MOOCs that are available now, they're much more diverse than that kind of simple dichotomy. So I developed a taxonomy, and it had 12 dimensions, 3 to do with the context of the MOOC, how open it was, how massive, how diverse, and 9 to do with the learning. So how multimedia is being used, the ways in which communication, collaboration and reflection are fostered, whether or not there's a learning pathway and what that consists of. In the learning design MOOC led by the Open University, we had 2 routes through, a light route and then a kind of more expensive one, and we gave an indication of how much time they need to spend on each. Whether there's any quality assurance, what forms of accreditation, if any there are, and whether there are links into formal learning. Martin Weller had a MOOC on openness, which was about 4 weeks, but it was sandwiched within a formal master's level module of 12 weeks. And the degree of autonomy. And if you want to find out more about that taxonomy, there's a link to a blog post at the bottom, and I've also worked that up into a journal article in the journal Inequal. So some current projects I'm involved with, Emma, which is a European project which has developed a MOOC aggregator platform. We currently have 2 MOOCs, one to do with learning in the 21st century, which gives an overview of technology-enhanced learning and how it can be used to support learning, and one to do with learning design based around the 7 Cs, and that's currently in its 2nd week. There's a project called eMundus, which Fabio is involved with, and another project, the picture on the right-hand side, is to do with a project called MOOCs for All, which, as I said, has developed a MOOC for creating low-cost, effective MOOCs. So what about social media? As I said before, it's certainly transformed the way I work as a practitioner. And really what it's done is shifted from a focus on a passive web to one that's much more interactive and participatory and social, where your social network is key to how you work. It's dynamic, it's networked, it's participatory, complex and constantly changing. And there's a range of tools, and it'd be a very interesting exercise for us if we had time to reflect on what are the tools we use on a daily basis and why. How do we find them valuable? People say to me, how do you find time to blog or use Twitter or Facebook? I find time because I find it incredibly valuable as a practitioner. And it's that benefit of being part of a global community of peers, which I just think is amazing. So the good and the bad, great in terms of the ways in which we can communicate and collaborate. I wrote a book for a Routledge book, which was edited by Rona Sharp and Helen Beetham. And for the final chapter, we got together in a face-to-face workshop, and we brainstormed what we thought were the key issues that have emerged from the book and how we wanted to develop them. At the same time, they put a version of that up in Google, Google Docs and invited the wider community to comment. After we brainstormed the ideas in the workshop, we worked in pairs on a particular theme. I worked with somebody called Chris Pegler on the theme and notion of openness, and we just wrote like mad for 40 minutes. And then at the end of the workshop, we had 8,000 words. And then the editors combined that with the comments from the wider community on the Google Docs and eventually came up with a final version of the chapter. Very interesting collaborative way of working. Having access to a vast array of information, arguably anything we want to understand and know about is available on the web. And the way in which social media enable us to disseminate information so fast. Many of you will know the excellent little videos by Michael Wesch, including the one from 2008, The Machine is Using Us. Short 4-minute video, absolutely went viral, millions and millions of people have watched it. He went to his head of department apparently and said, here's my best cited paper. It's being read by 20 people, and here's a video that I've developed which has been seen by X thousand people, X million people. So really a much broader range getting across. There are issues, however, in terms of privacy, and I had my own very interesting and nasty experience with online dating, which I'd be happy to share over a drink with you at some point. There can be issues in terms of leaving negative digital traces. We can have a misuse of data. George Corso in North America has had some nasty experiences where his identity has been taken and misused. There can be issues in terms of cyberbullying and trolling. There can be issues around privacy and security. My best friend Shani works for Hewlett Packard. She wouldn't touch social media with a barge pole. There can be issues around corporate control. They can be time consuming and they can be addictive. So what are my reflections on all of this? I think personally, the issue in terms of the difficulty of balancing home and work life. At the moment, I'm based down here during the week. I have a flat down here and then I go home at weekends, and that's kind of quite time consuming. It's about a 3-hour drive home. The significance of turning points, and it's interesting to reflect on your own key turning points and the kind of element of serendipity that takes us on a particular career path. The importance of support. As I said, I was very lucky with the girl's dad who was very supportive and enabled me to make my career changes. The importance of friends and good childcare support. The clash, of course, of having kids, and not that I wouldn't, not for a minute that I played that. I wish I didn't have them, my girls are great. And the politics of our area. I think e-learning is a very political area. There can be key issues. And finally, just to say, I love my job, I love my work, but I think it's also important to relax. I like going on holidays, particularly with my girls. And I'm a member of a sailing syndicate, and that's a picture of the boat Sea Scamp, which is based in Southampton. I've had many very pleasant weekends on that. So I think that's it. If you're interested in what I've been talking about, I put a lot of my presentations on SlideShare. That's my email here at Bar Spa. Another link to my E for Innovation blog and my Twitter ID. As I mentioned, I've got a Springer book, Designing for Learning in an Open World. Expensive. If you're interested, I can give you access to the near final PDF. And I'm currently working and hoping to have out next year a Routledge book on learning design, a practical approach. So I hope that's good, and I hope we've got enough time left for some questions. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Gronia. You get a virtual clap, I think, by all of us, and this was very interesting. Especially, I really enjoyed the way you presented your history. In fact, nothing better than your own experience as an open educator to inspire open educators in a course like the one by our project. So I will read for you a few of the questions that participants and also myself have posed during your speech. So the first one is, what are your experiences in overcoming? And I invite the others the participants to post your questions in the bar here below the presentation. So first, what are your experiences in overcoming the barriers to realize open education in class?
Okay, I think for me, the learning design work is key to that. If I think about my own experience of starting lecturing, I had no experience of teaching, and all I could do was draw on the fact that I was an expert in chemistry and my own experience of being taught, which was mainly through lectures, through tutorials, and through labs. And so basically I kind of fumbled my way through and eventually learned through my mistakes and improved my practice over the years. Now, typically nowadays, most institutions do have academic practice courses that people can do. So lecturers today are much better equipped than those of us who started in the sort of early 90s were. But that kind of led me to develop learning design as an approach to help teachers make informed decisions about how they could use resources, how they could create learning activities. And that's been the focus very much of my research over the last 15 years or so. And there are lots of issues around the use of OER. It's not as simple as what people assumed initially when OERs emerged was that just by making them available in a repository, people would use them. And then they found that that wasn't the case, that teachers weren't repurposing them, the students weren't using them as much as was expected. And when you delve into that, there are a number of reasons for that. Firstly, when you look at an OER, firstly, you have to find it. You have to find something that's relevant to what you're looking for. And then you have to unpack the implicit learning design, which is in the OER, which is not made explicit. And then you have to repurpose it into a new context. And that's a lot for teachers to do. So often they find it just easier to create their own resources. So I think those are some of the key issues around better use of those. And you mentioned in the chat, Fabio, about open educational practices. A project that I didn't mention looked specifically at open educational practices. That was a project called Opal. And what we found, because of this issue of lack of uptake and use and repurposing of OER, we articulated what were the practices around OER. How were they being designed and created? How were they being used and repurposed? How were they being managed? What kind of quality assurance was there around them? And we did that by looking in detail at over 60 case studies of OER initiatives worldwide, and then came up with these sets of dimensions. And then we concluded by coming up with a set of policy recommendations for different stakeholders of OER.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So I'll jump to the last question. In fact, this is a doubt I had also following my reading of your book, the red one on the right. Do you think that learning design, the way you frame it, can be applied outside higher education? Because what we discovered in our exploration in the OER project is that adult education, meaning not higher education, I mean adult education outside higher education, basically vocational training and any continuous professional development outside universities, is suffering from a few problems that seem to be stronger there than in higher education settings. So do you think that we would need another version of learning design, or that can be applicable also outside higher education?
Definitely it's applicable outside higher education. And we run hundreds and hundreds of workshops with people from different sectors and different interests and different kinds of learners. And it works equally well, whether it's higher education or schools-based, whether it's formal or informal. So it's just a set of conceptual guidelines, if you like, to help think about the nature of the learning activity and the ultimate learning experience. So yes, I would say, in fact, I've even run a workshop with 30 nuns in Barcelona who were school teachers, and it worked very well with them.
Okay, thank you very much. An interesting question by Ines has to do with, well, it reads, what is your experience with students concerning openness? So it seems that everybody thinks that students are okay with that, but she's asking, are they willing to share their knowledge and input? Are they aware of their legal rights and obligations? Is there an issue also with students or not?
I think they're not always as willing as they should be to share. And in fact, if you, I encourage my PhD students to keep blogs, and sometimes they do those openly and sometimes they just share it with me. But I've heard of cases where supervisors have told their PhD students not to keep blogs because they reckon that's giving away their intellectual property. It's not, of course. If you do a blog post, it's a perfectly citable reference. So it's perfectly legitimate as a way of publishing information. And I don't think they are as aware of their legal rights and obligations as they should be. The world of copyright around OERs and things like that is very complex, and there are all sorts of rules. Often institutions have somebody in the library who has expertise in this area, so it's worth finding that person out. But I think students need to have a clear understanding of what are the benefits of being open and what they'll gain from that. So I don't think they are as open as they should be.
Okay, thank you. I would now like to pick up Paula's comment in the questions. In fact, when I was asking about how to implement openness in adult education, she mentioned we should start by understanding copyright. Teachers should start by understanding copyright and flexible licenses. These are that are the different dimensions, as different dimensions of openness. So, do you agree that the first step should be working with licenses and understanding open licenses, or this is something that we could sort of give for granted because, as you say, you have experts in the institutions that can help?
I think it would be good to start from that perspective and to get teachers to have a better understanding of the copyright and the different kinds of forms of licenses and the different dimensions of openness. Yes, I think that's very important.
Okay. So then another question I have has to do with the relation between the open practices and network practices. In fact, what I take home from your presentation is that, correct me if I'm wrong, probably being more networked and using more meaningfully social media for teaching is a way, maybe the easiest way to enter the openness world in teaching. So how do you see the relation between a networked educator, adult educator, and an open adult educator?
I'm sorry, I've got a bit of a cold. I was lucky enough when I started tweeting to be working at the Open University at the time, and very quickly I connected with a number of really good people who were using Twitter a lot. So people like Martin Weller, George Siemens, and others. And so very quickly, Twitter became a really valuable network or community of practice for me. Um, I've met other people that I've introduced to Twitter and they just don't get it. And it is with the social media all about the network. It's about your connections and how you interact with people. So I have a friend, Mark Brown, who's works at Dublin City University. He's a New Zealander. And he once said to me, I love your tweets, Ron, you're really useful. I find loads of useful resources. But when you start talking about your cats or food, I just zone out. So different people get different things from the way we interact. And I think we need to, each of us, get an understanding of what is our digital identity. So I very much adopt very open practices. It's partly related to the nature of my job, and I find it incredibly valuable. Even the negative experiences I've had in social media have been useful because they've taught me something. So I think working out your network and what you're getting network and how you're interacting with your network. And social media are very much a two-way process. You can't just take from the network, you need to give too. So a colleague, Eric Duval, some time back posted on Facebook, I've got my first year engineers tomorrow. What should I tell them about what's important in terms of being an engineer practitioner? And lots of us responded to that and said, I think there's this and this and this. And so he was able to use that set of advice from people to report back to his students. And I've done similar things many, many times and found it very valuable. I hate giving my slides for talks too early because invariably on the morning before I'm giving the talk, there will be something very useful posted on Facebook or Twitter that I can incorporate and bring up to date in terms of my slides. So knowing what your network is and what your place and your role and your digital identity in it is, I think, is key. And as I said a number of times during the presentation, these kind of social media have transformed really the way I work.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So I see almost, I don't want to say that openness and community-based teaching are, or network teaching are the same thing, but sort of they are so complementary that it's hard to say. It's impossible to be open without being networked, sort of. That's your message. Okay, I see somebody, I think Paula Moraes is typing. I don't know if, Paula, do you have a specific question? Yes. So she's saying she's currently advocating to bring also better understanding of copyright and flexible licenses in high school. Imagine the empowerment the youth will feel when they understand that what they do matters, has moral and economic rights, and they can choose how they want to use them. And this is, I think, valid both in high school and in adult education. I think it has the same power. What do you think, Gronia?
Paolo, that sounds like a really, really interesting project. I mean, if you've got any outcomes for that you can share at some point, that would be great. I think it is really important, and I think your emphasis on the empowerment is really important. I don't think students, particularly in schools, do have a clear understanding of this yet, or the benefits. I always think Larry Lessig is an excellent speaker in this area, and kind of really giving a vision for the importance of what he calls copy wrong. And also, yes, as you say, in higher education, I think it's across the board, the benefits of these more open practices and understanding the nature of licenses. I mean, it's interesting, everything I do tends to be open, it's available online, and again, people say, aren't you giving away your intellectual property? No, again, it's there, it's time marked, it's dated, and you know, there is ownership of it. So I think adopting open practices is incredibly important for us as academics nowadays.
Okay, well, I think this is a perfect message to close. In fact, just as a summary, I would like to remind that this webinar is itself a learning object. It is itself an open educational resource. In fact, it's going to be shared and used by our learners in the OER app course. And in fact, the idea is that through the course, we're going to have also the possibility and give them the possibility to comment, and especially, hopefully, to use the links that you provide. In fact, I think we'll have to find a way to provide the links both not only through the webinar, but through the webinar recording, but also through the slides, because this is a very rich source of information. So if there are no more questions, I think we are just 5 minutes late, so we were on time if you consider the slight delay in starting. And as you've heard, Gronia is not only an active user of social media, but also a responder through social media. So you have her tweet contact and her email, so you can contact her maybe to know more, especially about the projects she mentioned, and about her work in the field of open practice, because what you touched upon are many important dimensions of open practice. So I would like to thank all the participants, and to say see you later in the OER app course for the next webinars and for the next chats. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much, Fabio, and everyone. Lovely to connect with you, and some really interesting questions at the end, and I hope the rest of the project goes well. Thanks ever so much. Bye.
Thank you very much, Gronia.